Thank you, gentlemen. We have two more speakers that would like to comment, and that is Paul Jessup. He's Riverside County Deputy Superintendent of Schools, and Martha Alvarez will then speak. She's from San Diego Unified School District. Mr. Jessup.
Thank you, Chairman O'Donnell, members of the committee. My name is Paul Jessup. I currently serve as Riverside County Deputy Superintendent of Schools and the Chief Administrative Officer for the Riverside County Office of Education. And I'm addressing you today on behalf of the county's 23 school district superintendents and Riverside County Superintendent of Schools, Kenneth Young. As you heard earlier in Mr. Savage's presentation, Riverside County is a large and growing area. Today, our districts and county office collectively educate more than 425,000 students, which is nearly 7% of the state's student population. By way of history, Riverside County's student population has almost quadrupled since 1980. We had between 110 and 115,000 students in 1980, and we have between 425 and 430,000 students now. In the immediate aftermath of Proposition 13, we mitigated our rapid growth and burgeoning schools with multi-track year-round calendars, double sessions, and by laying down seas of portable classroom buildings. We had little choice but to do so. We began to adequately address our housing needs in 1998 with the passage of Proposition 1A, the enactment of the school facility program, and our ability to pass local bonds with 55% voter support. While we were the fastest growing county in the state between 2000 and 2010, our land wealth dropped precipitously during the Great Recession and has yet to fully recover. Today we're growing again. Our student population is projected to grow by nearly 7,000 students over the next 4 years and by almost 30,000 students within a decade. Numerically, again, the fastest growing county in the state. I've been asked to specifically offer our perspective on the administration's recommendation to target resources to the areas most in need as we discuss the design of the next school facilities funding program. As a matter of principle, we share that objective. However, not unlike state support for educational programs, we believe that the state has an obligation to provide a basic level of support for all school districts while targeting additional resources to those with greater need. We believe this approach aligns with the foundational principles of the local control funding formula, as well as the principles of equity outlined in the Governor's school facilities proposal. When examining the Governor's recommendations and their potential impact on Riverside County school districts, we believe that on average, the county's districts would fare well under the principles proffered by the administration. The reason is twofold. As I mentioned, the county is projected to be the fastest growing county in the state over the next decade. We'll be over 450,000 students countywide. We'll have kids that will need housing for. Secondly, this rapid growth is accompanied by the county's low land wealth. Our dirt is cheap. Riverside County's mean assessed value per student is just under $514,000, while the statewide average is over $930,000 per student. But this average masks the broad range from district to district within our county, with a low of $220,000 per student to a high of over $1 million per student. So while many of our county school districts would likely do well under the budget recommendations, we have districts within our county that would likely not be eligible for state assistance under these same recommendations. And this is troubling for us. We don't take issue with using a wealth index, and we believe that assessed valuation per pupil is one of the best proxies for measuring a district's capacity to fund its school construction, since it's a collateral upon which districts issue debt to finance school construction. But we strongly believe that a wealth index is not what determines whether or not a district has housing needs. Whether or not a district has student housing needs is determined by answering two very basic questions. One, does a district have or expect to have more students than it has space to house and educate them? And two, are the conditions of the existing facilities safe, secure, and conducive to teaching and learning, including being fully equipped with the necessary technology for students to learn what we expect them to learn in our programs. These are the determinants of need. A district's relative wealth, its capacity to fund its need, is not in and of itself need. And this is where we both depart from and espouse the Governor's January budget recommendations. We do not believe that a district's wealth, assessed value per student, should determine whether a district is eligible for state financial assistance. We believe that many districts within and outside our county with great need could be unfairly disenfranchised from a state program that does so. We do believe, however, there is a strong policy justification for the recommendation to replace the one-size-fits-all grants with a sliding scale of state support based on a district's ability to finance their school construction needs locally. In short, we believe the wealth index can and should be used in the next state program, and that index should determine the level of state support, not determine if a district can access that support. Finally, I'd like to close by stating that Riverside County school leaders continue to believe that state and local bonds provide the best, most stable, and reliable source of school construction funding. Is it possible to fund facilities through a pay-as-you-go system? The answer is probably it depends on what that looks like. However, if through a pay-as-you-go system, the state provides annual allocations that school districts then must squirrel away to fund projects, it would be extremely difficult for rapidly growing districts like those in Riverside County to meet their immediate student housing needs. Consequently, we believe that bonds appropriately fund infrastructure needs across all sectors, including schools. We understand the need to manage the state's finite resources wisely and to be ever mindful of the debt we incur. But infrastructure investment is a long-term investment that provides the added short-term benefit of economic stimulus. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. With me today is Patty Herrera, who represents Riverside County, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Jessup. Ms. Alvarez, if you could just be succinct, not quick, but succinct.
Great. Thank you. And you can stop me if I go above 3 minutes. Good afternoon, Chairman O'Donnell and members of the committee. My name is Martha Alvarez, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the San Diego Unified School District. To give you some background on our district, we're the second largest in California with close to 130,000 students. 60% of our students are qualified for free and reduced lunch. We have 226 educational facilities and count with more than 15 million square feet of school buildings. In an effort to provide a quality school in every neighborhood, in the last 7 years, our voters have approved 2 bonds totaling $4.9 billion to repair, renovate, and revitalize district schools. The average age of a San Diego Unified building is 43 years. We believe San Diego Unified would not be eligible for state assistance under the proposed low per pupil assessed valuation, and we share concerns with the proposal because it appears to be too narrow in scope by only focusing on the assessed valuation. We believe that the state has an obligation to provide a basic level of financial support to all school districts. As a matter of principle, we believe the state certainly has a role in financing school facilities in order to provide equal access to education opportunities to students across the state. The state cannot solely rely on school districts' ability to raise sufficient capital to provide access to 21st century facilities and classrooms to all students, as there would likely be significant opportunity gaps in what local school districts are able to finance. We believe every district should be able and allowed to participate in the state facility program, and we strongly disagree that wealth or low per student assessed valuation should be the determinant on which districts receive state financial assistance. Instead, there should be a sliding scale for allocating state resources for renovation and new construction based on the age of facilities and equipment, construction type, location, current facility condition, types of use, and capacity and student enrollment, as all of these variables drive costs of facility projects. The years of inadequate education and state school facilities funding levels, where California school buildings were deteriorated faster than they were repaired and renovated, have led to a significant statewide repair and maintenance backlog. In addition to the conditions of a district's facilities, the political feasibility of passing bonds needs to be considered. What happens to those districts that may have the tax base but whose communities are not willing to support bonds? Eliminating the state matching grants would further disincentivize communities from supporting a local bond when they are seeing nearby districts receiving state matching funds. In San Diego, we have used the state's financial support as a selling point to getting local voter approval. Without the state's assistance, we cannot complete our planned projects in our program, and it would be harder to get local bonds passed. Just 2 more points. Our district and community view facilities funding as a state, local, and private partnership to pay for renovation and new construction. In our 2 bonds programs, we anticipated receiving between $200 and $300 million in state matching grants from the issuance of future state facility bonds. If districts like ours were not to meet the definition of need, what happens to the $200 to $300 million in state matching funds we anticipated receiving to complete our local bond project? Finally, one last note on Proposition 98 funding. We are against any state proposal that would appropriate Proposition 98 funds to pay for school facilities either as a pay-as-you-go, set-aside, or earmarked amount. Proposition 98 funds would be an unreliable and an unsustainable revenue stream. Districts need predictability and assurance when planning long-term facility projects, as these are long-term financial investments that require many considerations and thoughtful planning. Our districts have growing cost pressures to meet academic needs, and we cannot afford an additional significant cost like paying for facilities either through Prop 98 or LCFF. While it could be helpful to grow a district's local tools to generate revenues, that is not sufficient. State assistance to all districts in the form of matching grants is still needed and could be supported through a future state facilities bond program. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Ms. Alvarez and Mr. Jessup. Any comments for Ms. Alvarez or Mr. Jessup from the committee members? Thank you. Very, very thorough. Very much appreciated. Two more speakers are going to come forward, and they're going to speak specifically on developer fees, and that is Richard Lyon of the California Building Industry Association and Dennis Myers of the California School Board Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. Richard Lyon on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. Mr. Chairman, you began the meeting by saying it was a public-private partnership, and I represent the private part of that partnership. Just by way of background, I represented CBIA in the negotiations back in 1998 and before on SB 50. I also have worked on all the statewide bond campaigns since 1998. Our view of the program is that it's been very successful. We believe that it should continue in the future. When the superintendent was here, he mentioned that we have collectively raised through state, local, and builders over $100 billion. We estimate that probably about $15 billion of that has come from the building industry, and that is in three ways we contribute to school facilities. Certainly we dedicate land, but I'm not considering that. But we pay fees. We set up community facility districts, Melrose districts, special taxes that go on as a supplement to the property tax bill. And then we have master mitigation agreements in the larger developing areas of the state that finance the school facilities. So we estimate that since the 17 years that this program has been operative, our contribution just on that alone has been about $15 billion or more. I've been asked to give a very brief description of the history of fees in the program. I've passed out a more detailed testimony with footnotes, so for any of you who are really interested in pouring into it, you can do that. But the builder financing has been baked into the program since the 60s. It began with school districts requesting local governments as a condition of development to impose fees, and that happened for a while, but as you can understand, that was kind of ad hoc, and it produced an uneven patchwork of local contributions. In 1977, the legislature, in an effort to establish more certainty and uniformity, adopted statewide legislation governing school fees, and that was SB 201. And what that did is it authorized the cities and counties to adopt ordinances that indicated that there was a need from new development to finance school facilities. The findings that were adopted by the school districts were then transferred onto the city and county, and those were adopted, and the SB 201 fees were then levied against new development, and importantly, those could only be used to provide for interim or temporary facilities. And the question soon became, well, what about permanent facilities? The courts determined that, yes, in fact, it was appropriate for new development to go beyond just paying for interim school facilities and to pay for permanent school facilities. And in 1986, the state of California, in the 1986 Act, adopted a uniform way in which school fees were levied throughout the state of California. The 86 Act authorized districts themselves to impose the fees, not the local governments. It placed a limit on what could be acquired from both residential and commercial and industrial development. That was set at $1.50 a square foot back in 1986 for residential, and I think currently it is about $3.36 a square foot. And importantly, number 3 is that the program said that once the fees have been paid, this preempted the field of school mitigation requirements that could be required of new development. Shortly after that law was passed, a trio of cases came along that ultimately kind of undid the fee caps that were imposed by the legislature and the preemptive nature of that law. And this is what we call the MIRA line of cases. And the courts determined this, that if a applicant was coming into the local government and asking for a legislative type of approval, that could be a general plan change, a rezone, an annexation, or the approval of a development agreement, that the fee caps that were imposed by the legislature and the preemptive nature of the program didn't apply. It would only apply if the applicant was coming in and asking for an adjudicative proposal. We never contemplated that when we put the 1986 Act together. This was an interpretation of the courts. So from this point on, we had about a decade's worth of litigation. School districts and builders fighting over the appropriateness of mitigation to offset the impact from new development. When we put the 98 Act together, we really solved that funding riddle, and we created the historical partnership that was formed that we think works very well. The state's portion of this is that it picks up half the cost of the fair market value of the land. It picks up half the cost of bringing development utilities to the site, and it has a block grant based upon whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school that will go into the actual building of the facility. The local government has the responsibility with the local match. In the new growing areas of the state, builders said we will backstop the local government. If you can't raise the 50 cents to match the state's 50 cents, we will backstop you. So in the growing areas of the state, generally the financing comes from the state and the building community in the various forms that I have described. And what was important in the 98 Act as well is that we said there's got to be an analytical way to determine what the appropriate fee to be paid by builders when they come into a community is. And so we had the districts do a school facility needs analysis that looks at existing capacity, it looks at growth coming in, it looks at dollars they've already got, and a number of other calculations. They do it on a yearly basis, and then that is that's the mitigation then for new home buyers and builders. And importantly, once that mitigation standard is met, and again it's redone every year by school districts, then that's all that can be requested and be demanded from builders. And we said you can't use the planning process, or you can't use the environmental review process to leverage the project for more. That has been in place now since 1998. I think when we put it together, and Dennis was in the room, the superintendent was in the room. There's a number of people in this room that were in the room. It was a bit of a leap of faith. We didn't know really whether it would work, but we thought it would. And I think I believe that it's probably worked beyond our expectations. So we see it as a very valuable program, and we certainly see it as one that deserves to continue. I will say this: there's another component of the fees called the Level 3 fees, and the Level 3 fees kick in when the state is out of new construction dollars and the State Allocation Board is no longer approving apportionments for new construction. We're hanging on by our fingernails right now. If that trigger is pulled, then new home buyers builders then are required to pick up the entirety of the cost. That's a concern to us. California has very high housing costs. Our home ownership rate is very low vis-a-vis the rest of the nation, and it really squeezes the middle class when we start talking about imposing fees of $20,000, $25,000, or $30,000 per unit just for school facilities alone. It is very difficult for middle and moderate income folks, particularly in the growing areas of the state that Bill Savage talked about, to be able to qualify for mortgages when fees are that high. So as to the proposal in the governor's budget, I would just say this, that we believe that the state has a constitutional obligation to provide its school children with safe and secure educational facilities. The state has recognized that obligation. I talked about the 1960s, but you really go back to the you go back to the Field Act back in the 1930s, and then the State Allocation Board was established in 1947, and the State Loan Program was established then. So the state has understood that it has an obligation to participate in the renovation and the construction and the modernization of its school facilities for nearly 70 years now. We certainly look forward to getting more detail from the administration on the proposal, but we do think that, number one, as I said, the state does definitely have an obligation. That obligation has historically, for the last 40 years or so, been met by general obligation bonds. We believe that the public strongly supports school facilities at the both the local and the state level. So we would certainly believe that that's an appropriate financing mechanism to finance the state's partnership role in this. So I think for purposes of time and to allow others to speak, I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon. Mr. Myers, if you could be brief.
Sure. I'm tempted to just say what he said, because so much of what, at this point in time, we agree with what his analysis of history and a picture right now of where we believe the program should be. But I'll give you CSBA's perspective. Overall, we have serious concerns about the governor's proposal. We think that the partnership has already been explained. It's been a strong partnership. It has worked. It's been a three-legged stool, as we've referred to it, over the last 15 years. And this would pull out one of those legs and make it two legs and a stump. The notion that there's enough money in LCFF to pay for school construction and modernization, I'm not sure if I'm humored or offended. But with all the expectations placed under LCFF, with closing achievement gaps, meeting the needs of EL students, low-income students, foster youth, with new surprises on school districts of paying pinching costs that are doubling over the next 5 years, it's just remarkable that we can think that we can build. Once schools are built and modernized, we use Prop 98 money for the operational costs, for the heating and the upkeep. But to construct them, we think there's just not enough cash there to do that. But I was asked to talk about developer fees. So Mr. Lyon gave the history, and just very briefly, we think that, as Mr. Lyon said, when SB 50 was signed into law in 1998, local governments, lost the ability to look at school construction under the legislative acts, which is general plan stage, and consider really full mitigation. So under the new proposal, there's a talk about a new higher cap on developer fees. And from our perspective, caps don't work when you remove a major part of the funding source. And so to take the state out of the business of matching funds at the level that they've been providing over the last 15 years, we really think you have to go back to pre-1998 law and allow cities and counties to work with their school districts to look as they're planning for sewers and streets and highways, that they would also be forced to look at school facility construction, make sure that those kids generated from those houses have a place to be educated. And so, that's where we are. We think that the caps don't work under this. It doesn't really pencil out, and that we would just urge you, as local representatives, to figure out a way to continue the state construction contribution as a state-local effort with partnering with the private sector as well. It's worked for 15 years, and we just want to continue that. Lastly, sure, Prop 98 in the governor's budget is $65 billion, but when you're funded at 46th in the nation, I don't sit here with any shame at all to say, you know what, $2.5 billion outside of 98 for bond debt seems like a pretty good investment. If you get us to the average of the top 10, which is the Prop 98 goal, then we can talk about, maybe something else. But right now, a couple $2 billion outside of 98 we think is a wise investment, not something that we should be ashamed of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. And just a couple quick questions so we can get moving here. And I agree with your point about LCFF. I don't want it to become SCFF, Sacramento Controlled Funding Formula. We want to keep our hands off that. So I agree with that comment. Just a couple questions. Under the existing program, developer fees are essentially fixed. So under the governor's proposal, there will be one fee. It sounds like a single fee. And this is subject to negotiations, as I understand it. Do those negotiations occur at the local level? Are there a variety of negotiations across the state? Is it done in Sacramento? That would be for the governor's team, I believe.
The cap that we're imposing is similar to what's in place now for level 2, but we're looking at the cost. There's a lot of other requirements that are associated with level 2 that will have to be obviously addressed because there's some ties to the existing program in terms of the per pupil funding amount. But right now we're just looking at the actual cost. There's, again, a lot of other requirements that we'll take a look at, but for now we're just looking at the actual cost, and instead of level 2, which is 50% of the state cost, looking at increasing that to 75%.
So is the idea that it would be
approximately 75%.
So is the idea that it would be fixed across the state and there would be one negotiation, or would there be lots of negotiations across the state? Is it unknown?
That's one of the details that we'll still have to work out as we develop the program.
That's probably a big issue to some, I imagine. Mr. Lyon.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, we have been there, done that on a single statewide fee, and it doesn't work. The process that we set out in SB 50 is that each school district that's in a growing area look at its own need, look at its own cost basis, look at its land costs, look at its growth needs, and come up with the appropriate mitigation strategies in that district. That has worked very well, and the litigation we had prior to 1998 has effectively gone away. You're always going to find somebody suing somebody else out there, but the problems we had prior to 98 have basically gone away. The one-size-fits-all doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense, and so we're just kind of sticking our finger in the wind and saying, hey, here's a good number. Let's impose it.